Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Home Studio Simplified channel. So glad that you guys decided to tune in today. We have a very special guest on the show today, one that I've been really itching to sort of pick his brain and try to figure out what's behind his creative process. And I think from everything that I've ever seen from this guy, he's just got a really straightforward approach of explaining things. And like the title of this channel, he likes to simplify things. In fact, he's one of the individuals that I really was able to grasp compression from his teachings. So I'm really, really happy to have him on the show today. If this is your first time here, this channel exists to simplify the complexities of the home studio and to help you make professional sounding music in a less than professional space. The motto around here is that you can dream alone and you can even create alone, but together we can achieve so much more. And so without further ado, I give to you Matthew Weiss.
Hey guys.
And here goes the crowd wild.
Oh my gosh. That's usually what happens when I enter a room. There's just random cheering.
Right. So Matthew, like I said, do you prefer Matt or Matthew?
I'm good with either.
Okay.
We can go with Matt.
Good deal.
We're homies now.
Right on. Right on. So Matt, I've been following you, like I said, for a very long time. I can still remember some of your first videos, like back in where you're just literally in a car with a buddy of yours, like explaining stuff. And one of the first videos that I stumbled upon was you were driving actually to a gig. I believe it was a mixing gig. You were with your buddy, and I believe the phone was literally just like on the dash cam, just like sitting on the dash. And you were like, I've got to get this off my chest. I want to explain some compression. And immediately, like, I gravitated to that because you explained it in such a way to where like all of the fog just sort of dissipated. I was like, why have I was making it way too hard, basically. And from that, it sort of helped me to spur on this idea of creating a channel based around simplifying the complexities of audio. And I'm super excited to have you on the show today because I know that any question that we might receive from our live audience or any question that I throw at you, I really believe you're going to be able to give a really awesome answer for. So tell us a little bit about you for those who may have never seen you or know about you as of yet, and just sort of your background and, some of your audio background as well.
All right. Born in Philadelphia, grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, raised by a family of musicians. So music predestined. Jumped out of college, went into an internship looking to get into the music business. Ended up picking up an internship, graduated to some assistantships, started as an in-house engineer in the Philadelphia area of a studio called Studio E. And then from there went freelance and then moved out to California, linked up with 𝗏, got a couple platinum plaques, and here we are.
Nice. Nice. So the 𝗏 thing, did you reach out to him or did he reach out to you, or how did that happen?
So that was a masterful design. People always try and sell you you go out with just a hope and a prayer and you sleep in your car and then you make it big. It's the dumbest advice anybody would ever give you, because the only time you hear that advice is from the people where it worked out. But for the other 99% of the people who try it that way, it doesn't. You just never hear from them. I went out to California. I had planned. First of all, I had some resources. I had about 30 grand saved up. So that was one thing. Second, I was already had a good rapport with some engineers out here. So I linked up with a guy named Andrew Dawson. Andrew was Kanye's engineer at the time, and he was renting a studio in North Hollywood. So I arranged with him to do a studio share where I was taking it on the weekends, he was taking it on the weekdays, and we were splitting the cost. I convinced one of my producer buddies to haul out to California too. And I said, look, when I'm not in the studio, you get to use it for free. Just bring everybody on through. Everybody you can think of. Just get people in there. Make that studio work. I figure nothing bad could come out of that. If he wins, I win. If I win, he wins. It's going to work. So he brought through a ex-American Idol contestant whose manager was a guy named Hiroshima. And me and Hiro clicked. Turned out Hiro was A&Ring for Khan at the time, or at least he claimed he was. I didn't know whether or not he was, but it turned out it was real. So then Khan started trying to build a studio in Burbank, and Hiro took me on as the technical advisor. So I met Khan that way. as a technical advisor for the studio build, but he didn't have an engineer out here in California. So he started coming to me to just record little feature things. And eventually we just started hitting the road together. And here we are, 3.5, almost 4 years later.
Wow.
But anyway, it was mapped out that basically by getting that studio space and getting as many people through it as possible, the connections that I would need to move forward would show up. And that happened.
So it's sort of the saying, chance favors the prepared.
Yes.
And it looks like you definitely, and this is another thing that immediately I started to pick up on whenever I started following some of your content is, I love the fact that, like you just said, this was not like a willy-nilly thing. You had a preparation. There was all kinds of preparation processes to go through. You had a vision and you followed that vision and you said, okay, here's a plan. This is what I love about this particular story, especially because, like you said, I have heard so many people that have, I hopped in, like you said, hopped in a van, went down to, slept in the van, did some busking on the streets, started asking people. And for the few cases that does work, that's an awesome story. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that's an awesome story of, being the underdog and making it to the top and, but I also love the fact because that doesn't, like you said, that does not work 100% of the time.
No, I mean it can, but you want to stack the odds in your favor as much as possible. And that's not, the way that I did it is not the only way to do it. You could pound the pavement just trying to get your way into a studio any way possible. I think that's a more traditional route. But you still want to have a plan. You want to have a design of some sort that you can follow through on. Because if you don't, then you have nothing.
So do you think the days of actually approaching studios and asking for internships and stuff like that, is that sort of a lost art, a dying phase, or do you feel like it's still a possibility?
Well, I'm in California. The internships aren't even legal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, that answers that question.
Yeah. I mean, you could, so I came out with 30 grand. You could come out with like 80 grand and you could enroll into like some kind of a multi-year educational program through like LAIR or something like that, or pay $10,000 a semester to go to the recording connection where they can place you into an internship through an educational program, because that's the only way you can legally do it. But personally, I don't see that as the best way of going about it.
Nice. So if someone, let's just say, here in the chat, wanted to start working with a studio, what do you feel like would be their best way to approach a studio owner and say, hey, I'd like to work alongside of you?
Am I allowed to curse on this? Is that going to be problematic? Is that going to get you demonetized?
Let's try to keep it clean. I mean, I think I've got a beep button somewhere. Beep.
All right. That's okay. I'm good with words like flurf.
There we go.
So basically, California has flurfed the whole internship concept because there really is no way to do it without going through an educational system. So basically, instead of getting to intern and learn for the exchange of you doing, nonsense work like getting coffee and sweeping up, now you have to pay to do that. So unfortunately, in California, it's not going to happen. And I believe the same is true in New York. So if you want to get into a studio, the best way to do it is to go to a place where you don't have those kinds of regulations, like Nashville or Atlanta or Miami.
Wow. That's what I'm talking about, guys. This is stuff like I had no clue about this. So, wow. Okay. That would actually explain why there's this big push for individuals in our local area that's going to Nashville to try to take on internships. So yeah, that definitely makes sense. So sort of begs the question, Matt, because I know you're used to working around a lot of different genres of music. I know you predominantly focus on hip hop and rap. But where does your love of music come from?
It's just always been there. I was raised by musicians. So, it turned out that I'm terrible at every instrument that I play. I've picked up almost every instrument, and I'm glad that I have, because I know the mechanics of how to perform instruments and what the challenges are in certain instruments, which makes me a better producer. But in terms of my playability, like I can play keys a little, I can play bass a little. Please don't put me on a drum kit. My sense of rhythm in my arms is like really, really like it's not good. But I love music. I've always been possessed by music, and it, you know, it reminds me of home. It reminds me of not being home. So it's just always been there.
So if I read correctly, somewhere at some point in time I read, I believe it was your father was a jazz guitarist.
We're close. My stepfather is a jazz pianist.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. So definitely being raised around jazz, that right there in and of itself. I am a huge fan of jazz. Some of the old, like Miles Davis. I love 𝗠𝗏𝗏 𝗵𝗵. I don't even know if that classifies as jazz anymore, but
it's more experimental and kind of like intersects with, like, I guess, rock and punk, I think. But
man, I'm telling you.
No, I mean, it classifies as whatever it was to classify.
I know whoever engineers those recordings, I need to look that guy up because, man, those sound absolutely amazing too.
That's Philadelphia. That's Brian McTeer and John Long, I think, were doing those records.
Sweet. Yeah, those sound absolutely amazing.
I could be wrong. Look, don't take my word for it, but I'm pretty sure they're the guys doing that over at Minor Street.
Nice. So Matt, you grew up in a musical family. You loved music, were possessed by music your entire life. So at what point did that switch go off where you said, okay, I've been inspired enough, I want to become an audio engineer?
Oh, that happened in like the 6th grade.
Really?
I just didn't know it. Yeah, because in my middle school there was a theater program, and you know, you got to be, whether you want to be on stage or you could be in the stage crew, and there was this soundboard up in the rafters for controlling the sound in the auditorium for the school, and I said I want to use that thing, and that was it. That's how I started.
Wow, just kind of dove in there.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of became more formulated later on because it just kept coming up where, like, you know, I was in high school and it was the same thing. There were the plays and the concerts and everything, and I always liked to be working the soundboard and in all those. Plus, while I was in high school, I was making little beats on my rolling groove machine and Sony Acid, and so I was recording rappers and I was mixing down my beats and things like that. And then when I got into college, the best paying job on campus was the sound tech, especially if you were licensed to drive a van, which I was. So that was the only gig on campus that paid anything even close to respectable. So I ended up doing a lot of the concert recordings and setting up all the shows. I teched for Macklemore before he was famous.
Nice.
Yeah. So, you know, it was always there. It just took a second for me to go, like, why am I in school for writing fiction when what I'm really doing here is, what I'm really interested in is music and sound. And then I switched to music, and then I just left and was like, let me do the sound thing.
Was there any pushback from your family about switching that and that mid-swing kind of thing, or were they supportive?
Yeah. They were supportive, but when I started taking it seriously, my mother said something to me which haunts me to this day. She said, I don't want you to go into music. Because remember, my stepdad has been in music my whole life. So she said, I don't want you to go into music. And I said to my mom, don't worry about it. If I go into this field, I'm going to do it and I'm going to be successful. And she said, and I swear, I kid you not, she said, I know, that's what I'm afraid of.
Wow.
So that's what keeps me up at night.
Yeah. Moms have a way of doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. My grandma was the same way too. She would say things that was like so unexpected. It would come out of left field. And then like for the rest of the week, you'd be like, why did she say that? You know, so does she know something I don't? What's going on?
Well, they do know something we don't.
Yeah, they have years of experience.
More life experience, so they do know something we don't. But that doesn't mean we're not going to make the mistakes and go head forward into all of them anyway.
Right. Been there. So that's really cool that you brought up Sony Acid Studio, because that's actually one of the first DAWs I kind of gravitated to and started making some cool little loop-based type things. And my first quote-unquote album that I created with that was just like spoken word poetry type stuff. And I think I still have some of those recordings, actually. but not a lot of people actually know about Sony. But yeah, that was definitely a cool DAW back in the day.
Oh, the DAW options were a little slimmer there. You basically had like early Pro Tools. You had, which, you know, was still expensive relative to some of the other stuff. You had Sony Acid. You had a couple others maybe, and you had Digital Performer. And I don't know if you ever tried to use Digital Performer, but that was a mess. The learning curve on Digital Performer was absolutely terrible. So I ended up with Sony Acid, and then later on, when I got into college, I started messing around with Pro Tools and Fruity Loops, and I
Nice.
used those.
So that actually brings on a good question, because I get this a lot, and individuals ask me, you know, which DAW is the best? And of course, my response, I want to know what your response is, but my response is a DAW is a tool. It's basically like choosing one hammer over another hammer based off of how well it fits in your hand. So what is your response to which DAW is the best?
My response would be, your question's boring. Get better at doing what you're doing, and then every DAW is best.
There
If
you
you're
go.
limited by a DAW at this point in 2021, it's because you suck, not because the DAW sucks. Like, straight up. They're all great at this point.
Definitely agreed. So of your years of audio engineering, working with artists and clients, what do you feel has been the most impactful learning experience from all of these different years?
You know, it's really hard to put a finger on any one single impactful, you know, I've had some negative stuff happen where I took on a client that I should not have taken on, and I ended up really eating dirt for it. And that sort of stuck with me. So now when clients that I sort of have red flags about start coming around, I'm a lot less inclined to take them. So that's been a really good learning experience. I would say, you know, all of the people that I've met working with Hero and working with Khan, you know, because they're so vetted in the music business and they've been through the process of making so many hit records, there's just been a lot of sessions where I've like made little notes. My sense of timing has become really, really, really A plus working with Khan. So I mean, it's not any one thing. It's just this amalgamation of single moments that stacked up over 15 years.
That's a great answer, actually. And that leads me to another question, because this is sort of underlying theme around here from everybody that I've interviewed, from individuals that I bring on, people that I really, really look up to. The one thing that I always know is they're ever learning. And so who is someone that you look up to now as a mentor, someone that you can kind of bounce ideas off of, like, hey, do you think this will work? Or
Oh, I mean, the cool thing is that it's more my peers than people that I necessarily like rank above me in the hierarchy of careers. But you know, I reach out to the woman that I used to assist back in the day, 𝗬𝗫 𝗏. She's amazing, incredible engineer, and just an unbelievable wealth of knowledge. So, I mean, I still ask her for ideas to this day, and that's from 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago now. Oh gosh, oh my God, like 13 years ago. uh, my buddy Langston Massengale, who's the guy behind Handsome Audio, he makes the Zulu tape hardware tape emulator. Anytime I have a question really about it, whether it's music or technical, but I mean, he's sort of my go-to for technical stuff, but I mean, he's also really a fantastic musician and a very good engineer as well. So, I mean, he's great to bounce things off of. Andrew Wepper, Eric Rossi, you know, there's a whole clique, Keith Ross down in Miami. Like, it's just a whole clique of people. When I need poker advice, I hit up 𝗟𝗏𝗄.
which always comes in handy, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Hey, I mean, look, when I was interning and assisting, I didn't have many sources of income, so I used to go and hustle poker down at Harrah's Casino. Got to do what you got to do.
That actually brings me to another question, because recently I've seen you were getting into the whole cryptocurrency thing. How's that going for you?
Well, trading in general, stocks, trading, investing, you know, I I I kind of want to set myself up in a way where, you know, being 37, it's like I'm not going to be doing this as actively as I'm doing it now forever. So I want to make sure that I have multiple income streams, that I understand how finance works, that I can manage investments, that if I need to drum up money real quick for whatever reason, I can say, oh, okay, well, here's what it's looking like on these stock charts or on these crypto charts. Okay, I can kind of guess where it's going to go, and I can place in a trade and, make $100 or something, just setting it up and then setting a take profit.
So yet again, it comes back to that preparation thing of making sure that you don't have just all of your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Especially in a field that's as volatile as music. I mean, we saw this very much firsthand this year where COVID hit. I don't know what COVID was like for you, but within that first month, it got pretty bleak because I lost almost all of my work immediately, and I didn't really recover for about 3 months. And then it came back in spades. I felt like I was either getting lucky or maybe just people realized that it was not the apocalypse. But yeah, a lot of touring got canceled, and so the funding dried up, and everybody was trying to protect their funds in the beginning. And there's no reason why that kind of stuff can't happen again. In a way, it's happening again right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you think it's imperative then for people who want to do audio full time to have several different revenue streams? And what do you think are some good ways for them to sort of still do what they love, but also sort of protect their assets?
I think that it's important to look a number of years in advance at all time. I wish I was thinking this way back when I was in my 20s, because I actually had more than a Bitcoin when I first bought one, but I wasn't thinking about long term and things like that. So for me, it was just something fun and silly, and I ended up selling it very early. But now that I have a little bit more perspective, it's like, okay, where am I going to be in 1 year? Where am I going to be in 5 years? Where am I going to be in 20 years? What is that going to look like? And what needs to be in place in order for me to make that more of a likely reality? And I think that it's just going to be important to be able to have these things in order. And I'll give you an example of how being older is being wiser. I started looking into getting my ears insured. And you might think that that's insane, but this is my source of revenue. This is my income.
Absolutely.
99% of my income comes from the fact that I can hear. So if I'm in a car accident and a piece of glass cuts one of my ears or something like that, and being in LA, it's very possible, if I lose my hearing, I have no recourse. I cannot fall back on anything. So, the means of preparation is going to vary from person to person. You have to know who you are, what your interests are. I've always had sort of this mathematical way of thinking about things. So trading stocks and trading crypto makes sense. It's really no different than playing poker. It's the same thought process. So for me, that makes sense. But I'm going to tell you right now, for most people, it's not going to make sense. But maybe those other people have hobbies that they love. Maybe, I do a lot of teaching, for example. Maybe you like to teach. So start looking into that. If you start looking into it now and be patient, in 10 years, you'll be happy that you started now. You can't just snap your finger and make a successful YouTube channel or whatever it is. It doesn't work that way, but you can put everything in place, get started, and then it's just time and consistency. Whatever it is that you want to do, it's just time and consistency.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been your Matthew Weiss Words of Wisdom.
Oh my God. This is the best moment in an interview I think I've ever had. I need to get that sound effect, and I need to start triggering it myself.
No, but that was an awesome answer, because it's so true. Everyone's situation is different, but if you never plan for the future and then something happens and you're just left stranded on a desert island, I mean, it's like, personally here, in the last few years, I never understood or even liked, I always thought it was just a gimmick, a scam, insurance in general, until my wife became an insurance agent. And she starts explaining to me all this stuff, and I'm like, it actually is starting to kind of make sense now. So when she starts explaining, I'm taking out $1 million life insurance policy on you, I'm kind of like, okay, now I'm getting scared. All right. I don't know what's going to happen.
Oh, you're going to get murdered.
I just said that yesterday. I said, you might want to take out more of maybe a $2 million life insurance policy, because I've been getting some heart palpitations. She's like, yep, I'm on it. So I was like, wow, she's not even, not even budging.
Insurance is a scam until you need it.
Exactly. And that's the thing that I noticed, especially during this whole pandemic thing. I was like, she said that she was getting business like crazy, and that there were individuals that were in their 70s that was wanting to get life insurance that had never had it. And of course, now that they're 70, because that preparation wasn't in place, it's going to cost them hundreds of dollars a month just for a small policy. So I started to sort of change the way that I was thinking, and applying that to our conversation right now. What Matt was just trying to say, if not trying to, take words out of his mouth, but basically he was saying the more revenue that you can have from different various income streams, the more insurance basically you have to still continue doing what you love. So excellent words of wisdom. And along those same lines, let's just say an individual hasn't prepared, and something like, like what just happened, everything's ripped out, the rug's ripped out from under you. What would Matthew Weiss do if the rug was ripped out from under him and he had no other alternatives?
Oh, well, first of all, I've got intellectual property that I can immediately turn into. I could sell my intellectual property. There's still speaking engagements and things that I could do. And so that would immediately give me a buffer. The other thing is that I would just double down on the other things that I've looked into over the course of my life. Maybe go back to writing, going back to poker, looking into stocks, that kind of stuff. And that's the idea. I came from a point where when I was younger, I was very obsessed with living life in the moment, because I felt like that was really how to live life. And there's some truth to that. But living life in the moment doesn't mean that you have to ignore the future. In fact, actually, the earlier on you set things in motion, the less you have to actually think about the future. So, it doesn't necessarily take away from being in the present to also put effort into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, I apologize, my dog's going crazy in the background.
My dogs are chilling.
I wish mine would do that. It never does this until I go live, and then it goes crazy. But
come here, baby. Hi, good girl.
Well, both of them showed up. Nice.
Yeah, both of them showed up.
I have a miniature schnauzer. What do you got over there? What's?
I've got a German Shepherd Husky mix. That was the guy you saw running in the background, and then this little lady over here that you can only kind of see her hind legs. She's sort of behind me. Is a pit bull.
Nice.
Yep.
Gotta have some studio dogs.
Oh, they're the best.
So I have a question that maybe, I don't know how you're going to feel answering this, but I wanted to ask you anyway. There may be something that you can't answer, and that's totally fine too. But what are some common problems that you run into with clients, and how do you navigate through those problems?
Pick a problem and it's common. I mean, the biggest problem is probably people who are recording their stuff in a way that doesn't sound like how they want it to sound, and then looking to me to simply mix it in order for it to be what they think it should be in their head. That, and how I deal with it is badly. Like, I'd like to say that I'm an expert at everything in the universe, but actually it's extremely challenging when somebody records something in a way that sets the record up to sound one way, but they really want it to sound another way. That's exceptionally difficult to deal with, because you can either deal with the reality of the sound, or you can try to play into their imagination. And there isn't necessarily a good answer, because if you deal with the reality of the sound, you're ultimately going to get the best version of the record that you can get. But it's not going to be the version that the client imagined. And so they're not going to be happy with it. If you play into their imagination, they're going to be happy with it, but you're not going to be happy with it. So typically the way that I deal with it is I lose the gig, because I make it the best that I feel I can make it. And there's nothing really, I can fight that instinct. I can fight that, my sense of aesthetic, and try and make something into something it isn't, but it doesn't really work out that well. I'm not necessarily going to make the client happy that way either, but at least I can make myself happy by making something that I can stand by. So that's honestly, typically that's how I do it. I just do the best that I can, and then wait for the client to say okay, or wait for the client to say no.
That's actually not what I expected you to say, but that's, yet again, here we go. Matthew Weiss, words of wisdom.
Does this qualify as words of wisdom, though? I think I'm just admitting my own shortcomings.
Well, and actually, that's what I want to pull out right there, because that's the thing that jumped out at me, is the fact that as audio engineers, as professionals who are serving clients, there comes a time when you have to realize, like, I just can't do X, Y, and Z that you're asking, because that's not my forte. That's not my, my cup of tea, so to speak. Or maybe it's something that I can't do because I don't have the right equipment. Or maybe it's something I can't do because, for whatever reason, like, you're asking for something that's next to impossible. Take this vocal that I've recorded at plus 12 dBs and it's completely clipped everywhere you can, and fix that for me. Or else I'm going to get a different engineer. Well, sorry, find someone else. But yeah, it's a good point to bring up, though, that every once in a while it's okay to say, guys, I'm sorry, but I can't do this, or I'm not your man. I can refer you to someone who is. And so it's actually,
no, I'm not referring somebody off of a gig that is going that way. If I'm referring somebody, it's because I've quoted my rate and they cannot afford my rate. Then I will refer somebody that I believe will do a decent job, who is less expensive. And it will probably be one of my former assistants. But if somebody says that they're not happy with the job that I'm doing, it is on them to find an engineer that can do what I believe cannot be done. If they can find that person, good on them.
Gotcha. Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense too. You wouldn't want to hand your problems off to another engineer so they can pull their hair out and wonder, why did you send this guy to me? So yeah, that makes total sense. Do you have any studio moments, so to speak, that you can recall that became indelible memories?
I had a lack of a studio moment that is an indelible memory. It goes into this problematic client thing. I was supposed to do a session with 𝗍𝗫 6ix9ine, a session with 𝗍𝗫 6ix9ine.
Say that 5 times fast.
And he no-showed, and I was ecstatic about it. Let me tell you, I have never been so happy to have no-show in my life. And his buddies ended up shooting up a studio down the street from me later that night.
Wow.
So, yeah, that was, and then I was out with some friends at one point. One of my friends had a new boyfriend and he was a big fan, and he was like, "Oh man, that's such a bummer that you didn't get to record him. That's so big." And I was like, "It's not a bummer." He was like, "What are you talking about?" I was like, "Look, man, I'm coming up on 30. I guess I was 35 at the time. So I'm 35. Like, he's the hot new thing right now and all that stuff. But like, honestly, there's a hot new thing every 3 years.
Right.
I don't need to get shot in order to put up another plaque on my wall or whatever. I could care less."
Right.
Yeah.
So this question comes up a lot too, and it's something that I feel like is more of sort of an esoteric thing. And so that I wanted to get sort of your approach from this, but I've had individuals, and I have my own sort of opinions about this, but based off of what you just said. So what do you think is the separation, so to speak, from those bands that were around in the 60s, the 70s, that are still being played on the radio, that are still topping the charts, versus, like you said, these guys that are around, new people every 3 years? What do you think? And a lot of people think it was the analog gear, but I have a different outlook on that. But what do you think is that defining sort of the line of demarcation from those individuals who are still around with us today versus those one-hit wonders that come and go?
I think it's the means in which people become popular. So the mechanism in which people become popular, remember, music is music and entertainment. It's arts and entertainment. So a lot of musicians become actors. A lot of actors become musicians these days. So the way that music is becoming popular is through trends and through fashionable moments. So that's a good way to spark some interest and get something going very fast. But it goes as quick as it comes. Once something becomes out of fashion, it goes away forever. And very few of those songs are going to actually genuinely last the test of time. Now, a few of them do, but most of the time they slip through the cracks. The other thing is that the mechanism in which we can get music out to the public is way faster than the mechanisms that existed back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It's not the analog gear versus digital gear, but having digital gear, you could come to my living room and record a song. I could have it mixed down, mastered, and up on Spotify within about maybe 3 hours if we're all really good at what we're doing. That is conceivably possible. That was not conceivably possible in the 1970s.
Right.
So there was just less of this deluge of music being pushed to the public, and even the means in which music is monetized through companies. It's no longer about the success of one song. It's about just simply having as many songs out as possible. You'll notice that Daniel Ek from Spotify, who is a douche, and I wish I could slap him.
Somebody had to say it.
I mean, I think a lot of people have said it. I think that within the music community, I don't think he'd be safe walking at night.
No.
But his comment about, you can't just put out an album every 5 years and expect to be successful that way. It sort of rings true, but the reason why he's pushing that is because Spotify monetizes through listenership. So if it basically becomes a pyramid scheme, if you can encourage people to put their music up on Spotify, whether it's good or bad, they then get their family and friends to listen to it, which brings in more listenership, which raises the valuation on their ad share revenue.
Yeah, that's pretty sleazy.
It's sleazy because it makes the monetization of music does not become about how good the music is, whatever good is meant to mean, because there's been bad music that's been successful throughout all of history, but it's no longer about the quality of the music. It is actually literally about the quantity of the music. The more music that's out there, the more family and friends are tuning into Spotify to listen to it. And that's the monetization system. It could all be trash by every measurable idea, and he'd still be profiting from it that way.
Yeah, it almost seems like it has, in my opinion, it has cheapened what music and music creation really is, because, I mean, you've got, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of great musicians that are hitting the charts these days that are even recording from home studios or basements or cars even. I mean, you name it. But at the same time, it's sort of like the whole social media thing. When you got so much information being shoved at you so much, it almost desensitizes you to what is the good. And so I think that's how I feel like that's sometimes why people fall back on the older music, because it's just always been good. And, when Led Zeppelin first came out, I'll just riff off of Led Zeppelin, say, for instance, when they started getting huge, there was no social media. And so I think also, too, there's this element of mystique that's taken out whenever you have, individuals who are on their phones like 90% of the day, like, hey, I'm getting some fries at McDonald's. There's no mystique anymore about an artist. Like, what they're doing pretty much every moment of every day. Whereas these guys would like release a banger album and then go and run off to the hills of Wales somewhere and go and record the next one. Everybody's like, where are they at? What are they doing? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of missed that, actually, in a way. People didn't even know what a mix engineer was, or that job even existed. They wouldn't even be able to tell you what a producer really necessarily was. All they know is that when certain bands stepped in and made a record, it's had this magic to it. And, we know now that magic comes from a bunch of people getting together just who really, really understand music and really understand sound and really love the craft and putting in hard work. All that stuff that makes magic is some guy, some schlum with a razor blade and their reel of tape, gluing the tape back together and making everything feel right. But nobody knew that. Oh, my dog's asleep. Okay. Now it is truly the opposite, but it interestingly, it does something that flips everything over. It makes everybody who's an artist look like a normal person. And actually, while they are normal people, they do something that is exceptional that other people can't necessarily do. And so people start to forget that and start to believe that they can necessarily do it without putting in the work to actually get that good. I think Khan's a really good example because he's not considered like an amazing singer. He's got a fantastic tone to his voice, and that's what people recognize. But what they also aren't recognizing, because we have this sort of normal person image of everybody now, is that his sense of timing is ridiculously good, like insanely good. His own knowledge of his own delivery and how he can shape his own tone is unbelievably exceptional, like to the T. He can hear the smallest nuance of anything, and he catches it. On top of that, he comes up with everything in his head as he does it. All of the melodies of all of his major hit songs he wrote in his head in the studio, just by mumbling out nonsense with tune to it, going through the different versions and saying, this is the hit record right here. So his understanding of melody is crazy. Normal people don't have that until they put in the practice and the time, and they try and they fail and they experiment. And so it is not a normal person thing. But because now if you go on social media, you might see it's rolling through the 𝗶𝗶𝗏s or whatever, it looks like it is.
Yeah, that's a great point that you bring up there, because it's one that I feel like is often underrated, is the fact that, these great musicians and engineers even that we look up to, that did not happen overnight, and it didn't happen just because they snapped their fingers. It's much like what you said earlier about, positioning yourself and preparing yourself. You don't have a successful YouTube channel overnight. You also don't have, as you've already stated, successful timing overnight. That's still one of the biggest struggles that I struggle with is timing. And here recently, I've been working with a lot more rap artists and hip hop artists, and you got to have impeccable timing when working with this stuff, because they know it. And if you don't know it, they know that you don't know it. So they're like, what are you doing, man? That was supposed to come in at this time instead of that time. And and it's like, oh, give me a minute here. So,
I mean, I'm talking timing that comes down to feel, like where you can't necessarily hear increments of time. I'll do like 300 sample nudges, which at around 44 to 48, it's close enough either way, but that ends up being something like less than 10 milliseconds. And that is a small increment of time.
right.
That is the kind of increment of time where if you hear two things playing 10 milliseconds apart, it comes across as phase interaction to us, because we cannot distinguish that small of an increment of time, but you can feel it. And if you can feel it, it's important to really get that down and get that perfect pocket, because that's the difference between something that feels like it is somehow magically glued into the record versus something that is just kind of there with the record. There's so much timing is such an unbelievably important thing that nobody ever seems to talk about in our business, but it's that's what all of sound is. All of sound is just amplitude and time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to put it too. And that's one of the things that we have a monthly song contest here on the channel all the time. And I tell individuals, one of the things that makes me choose one song over another is not how well polished it is, but how much emotion that it evokes. And that time aspect, I've noticed over and over again. You can get a vocal from a singer-songwriter where the timing isn't the greatest, but if you try to nudge it back into time, all of a sudden the emotion is removed from that performance and you're lacking, and you're like looking at yourself like, what just happened? I'm doing it right. But when you put it back, all of a sudden, like, it just makes sense. And that's one of those sort of taboo areas to talk about with artists as well. Because when you start telling them like your timing is sloppy, people don't want to hear that. But
there's nothing, so sloppy is not a good way of putting it, because there's no such thing as wrong in music. And I know that immediately people would be like, well, wait a minute, hold on, what is this hippy dippy nonsense? Of course, there's, you can play an off-key note, and it's like, no, you can't. That's called an accidental, right? There is no such thing as an off-key note. It's an accidental. Now, whether or not that accidental fits and works for what you're trying to do, that's a different story. But if you're off pitch, you create tension and dissonance, right? So that can be useful. I've heard many records where there's pitch modulation that pulls things really distinctly off pitch, and it creates a sense of creepiness. And if you want to evoke that, that's doing it right. And if you don't want to evoke that, if you want something that feels very comfortable and friendly and warm, chances are then that's when it's doing it wrong. And it's the same thing with timing. If you're very upfront over a beat, either like right metrically on it or even a little bit ahead, you're building up excitement and energy, which can translate to anxiety and stress or tension, depending on the context. right? So sometimes we want excitement. Sometimes we want things to feel like they're jumping the gun a little bit because it creates this kind of like type of a thing. Sometimes we want to be laid back. We want to miss the beat. Usually we want to be laid back a little bit because it creates this sort of more relaxed glued pocket. So a little bit of layback is what most of the time we're going to consider on, but you can even lay it back further and it creates either the sense of tension in terms of anticipation for the next beat, or it can create this very relaxed sensibility. It can create a really loose sensibility. So it doesn't change things from right to wrong. It just changes the emotional context of how things feel. And whether or not that makes sense and works is the real question.
I need a bomb button for my head exploding.
Like Funkmaster Flex.
Boom. Dude, that was, yeah. You actually just put into words what I've been trying to explain here on the channel for like over a month. So thank you. We've been recently breaking down Michael Jackson songs and talking about that timing thing, about how the emotion is driven there. And Michael Jackson's timing was impeccable, but there were also times like you just spoke of where you can tell that he's purposely dragging or he's purposely pushing. And he was a master at this, I believe, just by the listening to these things. I mean, you get cold chills just listening to it. But you just brought out so many good points about, yet again, that emotional aspect of music that is often really undervalued and overlooked a lot of times by people in this industry. So kudos to you for being able to call that out and to pinpoint it in such a way and to explain it in such a way too.
I think that there's a good number of people who intrinsically recognize these things and maybe don't necessarily verbalize it. With the singer-songwriter example that you're talking about, you know, when the timing gets a little sloppy with the singer-songwriters, usually it's to evoke this sense of the song being more conversational. And that's what you end up losing when you put everything directly into time, because then it becomes a performance. Right.
And this would explain too why certain reverbs actually produce different emotional responses as well, being a time-based sort of effect. So if something is placed upon a shorter reverb will create a more like up close personal, whereas a longer reverb will sort of push things back and give you that more subdued feeling. So yeah, dude, that's spot on.
Yep. Reverb is an immensely emotional tool if you can get your head around it.
That's the hard part, because sometimes it's what you think is going to work in your head. You put it onto it's like, no, what's going on?
Yeah, very often is counterintuitive.
I think it likes to, sometimes I feel like audio mixing and mastering and all of this, I think it likes to mess with your mind sometimes, because it's like what worked on the last mix doesn't work on this one. It's like, how is that even possible? You know
how many times I've been looking to like kill a resonance in a vocal with an EQ or anything with an EQ, and I push up a band because I'm about to do my little search and destroy maneuver, and suddenly as I'm moving it, something seems to lock into place, and it's like this like weird narrow resonant boost that I've done, but it just sounds great. And I'm like, oh wait, don't touch it. Well, for whatever reason, I like this. I like the way it sounds. I can't explain it. It makes no sense. It's like a 14 decibel boost with a 1 dB, like a 1/2 octave Q or whatever it is. And there it is. It just works.
That's one of those moments where like you're ashamed to even show anybody your EQ. You're like, don't even look at this. You're not going to understand it. So yeah. One of the first things that jumped out at me early on, whenever I first started mixing other individuals' tracks, I got a singer-songwriter. It was just acoustic guitar and him singing. And we went ahead and doubled the acoustic guitar tracks. I wanted to, I already told him, I was like, if this is going to be mainly just acoustic guitar track driven, I want to make sure I can pan it left and right, get some good stereo field going on here. And I got to this point where while I was mixing that, I kept hearing this whoop, and I was like, what is that? And I kept going through there with EQs and everything I could, and never could find it. But when I muted one track, it was gone. And so I would come back in, and I was yet again search and destroy, like you just said. Whoop. It was like, what is that? And so I time shifted it by, I think it was like 24 samples, gone, completely gone. I was like, what? And then it actually appeared to be wider, and I was like, okay, that's one of those moments where you just like bang your head off the desk and you're like, forget it. I submit whatever you want to do, you know?
I think double track acoustic guitars is overrated, but that's just me.
Nice. Well, okay. Unpack that a little bit. Why do you feel that way?
So when you double track an acoustic guitar, it fills up the stereo spectrum, or the stereo field, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we're typically doing it. But when you're dealing with a singer-songwriter, usually you're looking for some kind of an intimacy and a rawness. And I feel like as soon as you start to bring that into that context of having double track guitars, you're now making it more produced. And that takes away from that intimacy and that rawness. Not always. It's not so cut and dry and everything like that. The other thing is that acoustic guitars are just basically balls of resonances. They're very, very resonant sounds. So when they start to overlap, like what you were saying, I kind of knew where I was going. Fun things start to happen, and it becomes a little complicated to deal with sometimes.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely agree with that. Absolutely.
I think even like stereo mic techniques on acoustic guitars are a little weird to me. Like, maybe like sometimes like a Blumline configuration can be cool, but like mid-side recordings on acoustic guitars is like, why not just put up some room mics? And because that's really what you're doing with a mid-side, but you're doing it in a way where you're more likely to screw it up.
Right. One of the, I can remember one of the sessions that I was working on with a local singer-songwriter, his Martin, for whatever, I mean, the thing was just blasting sound, and it was like, good Lord, what am I going to do? And I remember the greatest sound that I got from that was a small diaphragm in the normal place, 12th to 14th fret, about a foot back. But then I actually had an overhead mic just over his shoulder, kind of like hearing what he was hearing while he was playing. And when I blended the two together, it was like this sweet symphony of awesomeness. I was like, wow, why have I never done that before? Oddly enough, going back to what I said earlier, it's never worked again. So I don't, I don't know if it was just like exact placement in the room with the mics, and I don't know what was going on there, but it sounded absolutely amazing.
Well, that's the thing. If you're going to go down that road, because honestly, like that 12th fret position where, your foot back and then either directly perpendicular with the sound hole, or maybe you're like perpendicular between the bridge and the sound hole, depending on the boominess of the guitar, usually that capture pretty much foolproof. You're always going to get a good sound. And here's the thing about that. People tend to get a little bit bored in their own minds about whether or not the sound is something special. But what should be special and what you should be thinking about is, does it sound special because of the way I'm playing it? Does it sound special because of my choice of guitar? Does it sound special because of the way I've arranged the song? Find the specialness and the magic in terms of the actual music itself, and let the sound capture be boring and predictable. It's fine, as long as it's capturing what you need to capture. Now, is it worth getting a little fancy and sometimes throwing an overhead mic, or maybe putting like a PZM or something like that at the foot, or, what's the other one that I've seen? I've seen some weird ones before, but people put like microphones in trash cans and things like that just to like get some kind of a texture. Is that worth playing around with? Absolutely. And when it works, you get something that's really awesome. Most of the time, it's not going to work. Like, unless you're really, really, really good at tracking. If you are a G at tracking acoustic guitar, by all means, but you need to be, it's like being a specialist as a doctor. Like, if you're a general practitioner, you're going to know what a throat infection looks like. But if you're an ear, nose, and throat specialist, you're going to know exactly what's going on. You can specialize, and I encourage people to do it. But if you're more of a general engineer, like I am, I always encourage people to just go to the things that work most of the time, unless you have a lot of time in which you can experiment.
Excellent answer. In fact, it sort of piggybacks off of an answer I got from Warren one time when he was on the channel, and we were talking about recording drums, and he said he went into the studio and they said, oh yeah, I can't remember the drummer's name right now.
Was it Matt?
Yes, Matt.
Yeah.
He said Matt actually recorded in this studio. He had these set. He's like, whatever Matt did, let's do that. And he said, I saved myself like hours and hours of setup and boggling my mind and trying to, when I knew if Matt knew, where to set it up and how to get that kind of a sound, then that's what I want to do. So it goes back to that same mindset too of, I'm all the time like telling people, use presets to get you there. You don't have to stick with a preset, but at least use that preset to get you in the ballpark to save yourself all the time. I'm trying to sculpt every sound, from the ground up, and use templates and use things that are going to make your job easier to get to that next stage, because ultimately you can get to that point sort of like, I don't know if you call it the Fletcher-Munson curve or whatever you would call that, where you're basically at this point of no return where you've spent 6 hours on a mix trying to make a snare sound great, and then you go back to the first take and you're like, ah, crap, that was actually better than what where I'm at now. So
Yeah. It's not Fletcher Munson. It's that curve where it's like you're making it better, you're making it better, you're making it different, you're making it different, you're making it worse, you're making
right.
it worse.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that's called now.
It's called life.
I have brain farts more often than usual here. Now that I'm 39, by the way. I'm not sure if you're willing to share your age, but I'm 39, by the way.
I'm going to be 37 in 10 days. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Well, happy early birthday.
Thanks, man.
So you've shared a lot of different moments, I'm sure, in the studio. What can you look back to as sort of a defining moment in your career whenever you look back on those beloved studio moments?
Defining moments in my career. Gosh, I don't feel like there's been too many. See, this thing is there's very few singular moments. I mean, yeah, I don't think anything has really been super career defining. Here's a good one. So the first mix that I did for Con was a record that we recorded in Miami called 𝗬𝗀𝗀, and it's out. It's got Pitbull on it now. Originally had a reggaeton artist called 𝗬𝗲 on it, and we were at the DR for a music video shoot. They had done a feature swap. Oh, not bad. 𝗬𝗲 jumped on a couple of Con records, Con jumped on a couple of 𝗬𝗲 records, and we were filming 𝗬𝗀𝗀, and that was in the Dominican Republic. So while we were there after the music video shoot, we rented jet skis and a boat, and we went out on the lake. And on my laptop, I had the mix of 𝗬𝗀𝗀, and I'd never mixed anything for Con at this point. And so I played it for him on the laptop, and he was like, okay, just pull up the percussions a little bit, and otherwise I think this is great. I think it sounds really good. We were just listening on headphones, and then he was like, blast it on the boat speakers. So I linked it up to the boat speakers, and I hit that play button, and everybody went totally fucking nuts. Oh, my bad. Everybody went totally crazy. And that was a really strong moment, because I think when Con saw that, he realized I was more than just a tracking engineer. I could also mix records as well. So we played it like 5 times in a row back to back, and I've been mixing not every record, but pretty much every record of his since.
Nice. Yeah, that is definitely a good moment whenever you play it back for the artist and they go, what? But
yeah,
it's the other that you're kind of like, oh man, when they go, well, which at the same point, I'm sure you've worked with artists before, who you just can't please for nothing. And
oh yeah,
I've had a few of those where I have literally jumped through hoops to the point where I thought, you know what, I'm not jumping through any more hoops. You get what you get, or else, find someone else. And 9 times out of 10, what I've seen happen is these individuals go to a better, mix engineer, a big name studio, as they called it. One individual called it. I went to a big name studio, not this guy who's operating out of his bedroom. And they came back and was like, dude, I paid like twice as much, and he got it sounding worse than what you got. Is there any way we could? And I politely declined. I said, I'm sorry. I feel like you kind of slapped me in the face in the first instance. So
I tend not to take that stuff that personally. I had that happen recently, actually. A reggaeton artist, he sort of insulted me in the process, which was not cool, but I kind of just brushed it off. But it was one of those things that I was like, let me file this in the back of my mind. So he sent me this record, and when he sent me the record, he had expressed that he was not feeling completely confident about it, and that should have set off a big alarm bell. But I guess because I just had too much of a volume of work and I was being pulled in too many different directions, I didn't really address it. So he sent me the record, and I mixed it down. I sent it back, and he was like, well, this is not really as good as the other ones that you've done for me. Maybe you just haven't done reggaeton in a while. Meanwhile, I've been doing like tons of reggaeton. So I was like, what? Don't do that.
Right.
Anyway, he was like, I got another guy who mixes reggaeton. I used to mix some of my stuff. I'm going to take it to him. So I was like, okay, yeah, take it to him. So I took it to him. And I guess that because he had my mix already to like base it off of, he was happier with the result, but he still wasn't happy with the result. So he came back to me to do the next records. And I sort of, when he came back to me, he was like, yeah, I think that I just need to switch up the way that I'm tracking my overdubs and things like that. And I was like, listen, that's not really the problem. The problem is that when you sent me the record, you were not happy with it. That was the problem. If you're not happy with what you create as you create it, you're not really ever going to be fully satisfied with how a mix sounds, because a mix is just going to take whatever's there and make a better version of it. We can change things to an extent, but the core of it, the soul of it, has to happen within the actual production, not the post-production. And so if you're not feeling good about a record, you're not really going to feel like it's 100% no matter what happens. So don't even send me anything to mix until you're happy with the record.
Yeah, that makes total sense. That makes total sense. And to your point, that would be like the individual that, you hand them $1 million and they say, well, it's all in $1 bills. I don't want it. So at the end of the day, if you don't like the music, you're not going to like the mix. That makes total sense.
It depends on what's missing. Sometimes certain things really can be brought out in the mix. Like you can add a whole vibe to a record in post, but you're also changing the record at that point too, which is already, that's a very trepidatious proposition, because it's not what the artist originally envisioned. So it's like you're gonna have it one way or another. You either like it to begin with, or you get a different record,
right?
One or the other.
And to make this perfectly clear to not just to you, but those in the chat who frequent the channel and know my personality, that I'm not typically the kind of person that would turn anyone down, but this individual did bring up legal aspects, which is what made me on that second time around.
As soon as legal aspects are brought up, then it's immediately like, no, goodbye.
Yeah.
You're done.
Because I don't think a lot of people don't fully understand, once you've sent an email, once you have recorded tracks, once you have, a vocal that's laid down, you don't really have much of a leg to stand on when it comes to trying to sue somebody for any kind of, because still, I guess there is, but it's sort of a tricky situation. But either way, when someone starts bringing up legal aspects of a song that they actually got a discount on, in my case, I gave the person a discount, because like a huge discount, because his daughter was very young and I wanted to help her out. And so he kept coming back with stuff like, she's got a lisp. It sounds like she has a lisp. And so I went back and checked the whole project. Was like, I'm not enabling any kind of a de-esser at all. So I went back and just had my...
Does the daughter have a lisp?
That's
my first question. Does she have a lisp?
That's the funny part is, and well, it's not funny in that sense, but it was funny in the sense that I let my wife listen to it, and she goes, these were the raw tracks, nothing done to them. And she goes, yeah, she has a lisp. And I was like, okay, so I'm not crazy. All right. And yet again, that comes back to that, area that it's not really, it's kind of a gray area, but it's like, what can you do for that? I mean,
there's some things that you can do to mitigate it, but if somebody's got a lisp, they have a lisp. Like you can use a multiband transient enhancer of some sort, like the BX, to actually exaggerate the sibilance of something, and then simply turn down the treble. You end up getting a vocal that's going to be overly warm, because you can't let it be as bright as a typical pop vocal. But as long as that context can work, it can sound okay. Then there's also some recording techniques that can help a lisp along. So, making sure that you have the microphone picking up the top palate of the voice, like because of where an S comes from, it comes from the top teeth and like the soft palate on the upside of the mouth. So sibilance is going to get picked up by the way I've got this mic positioned. It's going to make things a little bit more sibilant because it's aiming up at the reflective part of my mouth, which is going to carry sibilance. So those kinds of things can help as well. But lastly, it's kind of like saying, well, this guitar doesn't have an E string. Why doesn't it have any low end in the guitar? Well, it's because it doesn't have an E string. You know what I mean? Like if she's got a lisp, like it's always going to sound like she has a lisp to a certain extent, because that is the way she sounds. And the real way to deal with that, is to make that a feature of the vocalist, to make that part of their sound, because Method Man from Wu-Tang also has a pronounced lisp and his voice sounds awesome because of it. So you lean into what you have. If it's got quirk, you make that part of it. That's all. You write the lyrics to avoid the lisp where you don't want to have it, or you lean into it to make it come out for whatever reason. You know, you keep away from too much staccato rhythm and you lean into more legato lines so that they carry through. And that all comes down from the song that they're bringing you in the first place.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And that brings up a good point, because there's several artists that we listen to over the years that have these sort of ticks that make them who they are. So
every artist has ticks that make them who they are.
Right.
𝗏𝗏 sounds like a human trumpet. The guy has got more nose tone than any other human being walking the planet, and people love it because it sounds amazing.
Right.
Everybody's got quirk to their voice. The quirk is what we want. So you have to embrace things for what they are. You can't fight into making into something they're not.
That's a really great way of looking at it too. It kind of alleviates some of the pressure off of the engineer if you look at it that way, actually. So, by the way, if there's anybody in the chat, if you have a question for Matt, feel free to chime in and ask a question. I'll try to get to it. If you want to make sure, absolutely positively sure, that question gets answered, you can use the super chat feature at the bottom right-hand corner of your chat bar there, and it will guarantee that I will see that. And you can do that for any amount, starting with $1 million. And then we can move on from there. So
if it's $1 million, I get a royalty.
Right. It's on camera now, so it has to be. It's legal. So, Matt, do you have any favorite pieces of gear that you feel gets you to a better end result faster?
𝗏𝗏 M7.
Wow, he was right on that one. Okay.
I love that reverb. It is I could deal without anything else in my entire arsenal, but if I didn't have that, I would be sad.
Nice.
Like literally, that's the one. Everything else, there's something that's interchangeable.
Okay. Well, then that leads me to the next question. So then what's one of your favorite plugins that you have as of late that you're using, you feel like you're reaching for every single mix?
Probably the Slate Custom Opto. I got that as a beta because I have an endorsement with Slate, and that thing is really, really nice. It's like, it's not a CL1B, but it comes from the same ideology of a CL1B. A CL1B was basically TubeTech's attempt to create an LA2A that could have varying controls, so that you can control the ratio, the attack time, the release time, all those kinds of things. And then this is sort of the same idea. It was to make an LA2A, but with varying controls. But it wasn't modeled after CL1B. It was just following the same thought process. So I've been using that a lot.
Nice. Yeah, Slate is a giant, in my opinion, in the audio industry. This guy has created so many cool things that have helped individuals. One of my next purchases that I'm really wanting to venture out to is actually the ML1 and that whole mic modeling system. When I first heard that, it was I believe it was during the NAMM show, I wasn't there, but it was actually during not the one where he went off on the people.
No, that's the one I was at.
That was awesome, by the way. Not for him, with a marching band going through while you're
horrible. I don't know who thought it would be a good idea to put a marching band into like a closed warehouse space, but that was one of the most awful. I haven't been back to NAMM since. I'll probably never go again.
Yeah, that was not only was it rude, it was like, why? Like,
no, it was extremely distasteful. People pay tens of thousands of dollars to put up booths in NAMM, and then to have the audacity to have a marching band that's walking by people's ears, incidentally.
Yeah.
It was exceptionally loud, and it was really not fun for anybody.
He definitely handled it probably better than a lot of others would have.
Better than I would have if I had a speaking platform at that point. You want to talk about whether or not I can curse. It would have been I would have been looking for people.
Yeah, you could tell he was pretty livid, and with good reason.
Yeah, almost everybody in there was furious. It was a very aggravating moment for everyone. I don't know what they were thinking.
𝗏𝗏 𝗧𝗿 Music has a question. He says, who is responsible for applying vocal effects on recordings, an artist or a sound engineer?
Oh, everybody is responsible in a way. It's, the vision of a record is usually when people come together and come up with good ideas. So, I mean, a vocal effect can be something that comes from the producer, something that comes from the artist, or something that comes from the engineer. Also, shout out to 𝗟𝗏𝗃. That's my homie.
Oh yeah, he's an awesome guy.
Yep.
Pleasure to have him in the chat as well as lurking around the channel all the time. In fact, before I even shared this, he had already shared it. So I love him for it, man. He is such a kind soul.
Yeah.
That actually brings me to sort of a, yet again, more of an introspective question, but one that I wanted to ask anyway. What has music done to shape who you are today?
I mean, what hasn't it done at this point? It's one of those things where it's like, it's not just a career, it's a lifestyle. So it's, I don't wake up, go to the office, and then come home and then live my life. My work stays with me from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed. Sometimes it shows up in my dreams. I've mixed records in my sleep before, literally. You know what I mean? Like, I'll stand in the shower and I'm listening to a record in my head, playing it back. So I pretty much live, eat, breathe music. I was married to a musician. Now I'm in a long-term committed relationship with yet another musician, which I swore I would not do, but here we are. What can I say? Love has a way. It's just, I can't answer that question because it hasn't shaped my life. It is my life.
That's a really good way to put it, because honestly, I definitely can feel the same way myself. I think if I didn't have music, I don't think I would be me. I would be either the shell of a person, or for that much, I would end up, who knows, honestly.
I feel like I'd just be basically waiting around to die.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
Exactly.
here I am, I'm alive, like, might as well do something, but here we go.
Well, and along those same lines, I feel like music actually is what helped me to still be here today. There were times when I went through some very, very dark times in my life, and not throwing this out there to put any kind of a black cloud over what has already been a very positive interview, but there were times when, attempted suicide had even come up, but it was the music and the love for music that pulled me out of that dark area. And I feel like if I hadn't had music at that time, I would have probably actually went through with the whole thing and I wouldn't be here today. So music has impacted me in crazy ways that I don't think anyone will ever understand. So
that is something that I've heard a pretty fair number of times.
Yeah, I don't think it's one of those, it's not really talked about a lot. But it's one of those things that the more musicians you talk to, the more you realize that music means so much more to them than just beats and melodies and, BPMs. So 𝗟𝗏𝗃 says, thank you so much, Rob and Matt, for your nice words. I highly appreciate that. Well, thank you.
Thank you, 𝗟𝗏𝗃. Yeah, well, because if it were purely vocational, nobody would do it. This is not an easy business.
Right.
It's not an easy business, but you can only succeed at things that you really love to do. So, if you don't love music, you probably shouldn't go for it. You're not going to be able to put in the time and the effort and go through the unbelievable tough times that come with it, where you're standing at the Center City welfare office going like, is this the moment where I really need to get on food stamps? Like, did it come this far? You know what I mean? Like, I got the gig, so why am I here? And you realize, because getting the gig is not the success line. Right. There is no success line. So it's something that you have to just keep perpetuating and perpetuating. So it's not something for the faint of heart.
So I read somewhere where you're actually, I'm gonna kind of steer it back towards the gear type question here, but not to minimize what's already been said, because I feel like that needed to be said. Maybe there was someone here in the chat today that actually needed to hear that. That success isn't measured by where you think you should be, but by how much joy that brings to you.
Listen, let me give a quick little thing on success right now.
Absolutely.
Because I've walked many lanes of it. And I can tell you, remember the story about the multi-platinum most popular rapper in the world at the time, 𝗪𝗏𝗃, and how glad I was that he didn't show up? The younger me would have been dying to have him in the session. But when you start to see success in different terms, you start to realize that success has nothing to do with any of that. I'm already working with unbelievably wonderful creative people most of the time, doing something that I love to do, making my income doing it. I mean, barely keeping up with the expenses of LA. So let's just move that to the side. But you know what I mean? For me, success is being able to buy time now. Really,
Right.
that's what it comes down to. I'm not impressed with working with famous people anymore. Been there, done that, and I could never work with a famous person again for the rest of my life. I don't need to have a Grammy. I have a couple platinum plaques. I definitely don't need any more. All of these things are really irrelevant. And the older you get, the more you start to realize that and feel that. And what actually really becomes the definition of success is going to be, you know, spending the time with the people that I love and being able to enjoy life as I have it. And that's really what I'm working toward at the end of the day. That is the actual measure of success.
Okay, so that, my friends, was worthy of Words of Wisdom with Matthew Weiss. Very, very good, man. That was, yeah, you encapsulated it very well. It's one of those things that it's hard to have discussions like that sometimes, because, especially with younger artists, because they really feel like that the apex of all life rests solely upon making it platinum or anything like that. But
because they want the attention. When
yeah,
you're young, you want to be the star and you want to be the center of attention. You want everybody to love you and you want to be celebrated. And you know what? I hope that people get that in their lives, because when we want that, it feels important. And then you get older and you realize it's not.
Right. Right. Very good. Very good. So I have to ask, you recently have said that you were redoing a course of yours about compression. Is this correct?
It is correct.
Awesome. Awesome. So before we drop the knowledge bomb of where they can find that, can you give sort of just a snippet of something from that course, sort of a teaser, so to speak?
Oh, I just did a really a good segment on compression on drums. And I started it off with a little pearl of wisdom that took me about 10 years of trial and error to figure out, which, you know, you want to jump 10 years in your engineering. This course will help you do it. I'm about to give something away for free though, which, you know, royalty.
Should I have the button ready? The harp?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. We just beep out everything I'm about to say. When you're learning to engineer, you spend a lot of time learning how to make drums as powerful as you can possibly make them, especially if you're coming from like a hip hop background, which I am. You know, having those very competitive drums where it's like the kick hits so hard the speakers explode and rip out and the snare just like chops your neck off and all that kind of stuff, making the absolute strongest drums. Right. A lot of that comes down to compression technique, right? Because we can reshape the drums to have the exact attack and the exact body to make them hit as hard as they can. We can fit as much of that drum energy into our limited digital ceiling as possible with compression techniques. But here's the thing. After a while, you start to realize that making the drums the most powerful that they can be, while that's technically a great skill to have, is actually not the end goal. The real goal is to listen to how all the drums interact in the groove. And so you'll find that sometimes making the drums the most powerful they can be actually takes away from the groove. So when you're setting things, and you know, in general in mixing, we don't want to mix in solo, but when you're setting your drums specifically, you want to be hearing all the groove elements at the same time, so that as you adjust the body of the kick, as you adjust the attack of the snare, you feel how that relates to the overall groove. And that's going to be ultimately what creates the best records and the ones that the most successful artists gravitate to, because they're going to have the most groove and the most rhythm. And that's what people are really listening for. There's not a lot of things in mixing that determine the success of a song. It's usually like the accumulation of a lot of small choices going in the best direction, but you can get a few of those choices, maybe not perfect, and it will not impact the success of the song. But if you mess up the groove of the record, versus if you improve the groove of the record, it's going to have a 1-to-1 correlation on whether or not that song sells. It is extremely important. So that's the little segment that I was doing. Yep.
I should never have got this thing. These buttons are way too tempting to push.
I'm going to hop on Amazon.
Wow. Yeah, dude. Yet again, knowledge bomb.
Yeah, I mean that this course when I went back, I watched the original course that I did because I made this course about 10 years ago, and I watched it and I was like, okay, I mean it's cool, but it's not nearly where I'm at today with it. So I mean in this course I'm explaining like I have a segment where I explain the mechanical side of compression, like what's happening under the hood with the actual electrical circuits, in a way where even if you have no electrical background, you're going to understand it, and you're going to understand it thoroughly. You're going to know what the mechanics are, because there's certain things that are actually fairly simple ideas if someone just takes the time to freaking explain them. And most compressors are simple in architecture. There's a lot of complicated things that go into making the main system of a compressor work, and that's why the circuits look so complicated. But the actual compression circuit, the thing that's really working, is usually pretty simple. So everything from the technical to the creative side and everything in between, it's all going to be in there.
Well, that sounds absolutely amazing. Where will they be able to find that? Is that going to be on the Weiss-sound.com?
No, Weiss-sound.com is if you want to hire me.
Okay.
𝗏𝗏𝗏.com.
Ah, here we go.
Coming very soon, hoping to launch on my birthday, September 6th. It's a little bit of a grind. There's quite a bit more to go. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to make that finish line, but I set that finish line so that I'd at least be working toward it. But WeissAdvice.com is going to be coming in September. And then there's also my YouTube channel, which is Weiss Advice on YouTube.
Awesome. I will be including the links that aren't already included in the description of the video. Now, as of right now, you can find the links in the description of this video for the Weiss, the website. What is it? Weiss slash, or no, not slash.
Weiss-sound.
There we go. Weiss-sound.com.
That's for people who are hiring me to mix records.
Okay. And then just underneath that, you're going to find his hip hop course that is on one of the sponsors of this channel, the Pro Mix Academy.
Right.
So, real briefly too, because it's been about a year now that I've been a Pro Mix Academy mentor, I want to know, just straight from the horse's mouth, what do you feel like you have gained from becoming a Pro Mix Academy mentor?
I love working with Warren. I've gained a lot in terms of, well, there's a number of ways actually. For one, when I do tutorials with Warren, he usually sets things up in a way where I get to do things that are outside of my own home. So because he's capable of providing studios and has the mechanism to cover costs for those kinds of things, and he knows great musicians and things like that. So I was able to do a really fantastic drum course working with Warren that I would probably not have been able to do on my own, or at least not as easily. So there's that side of things. The other thing is that, you know, he's been doing this longer than I have. He's more experienced. He's a lot more knowledgeable about certain things. And so having somebody who I can learn from to be working with is really helpful, because it allows me to broaden what I'm able to teach. So I can learn as I'm teaching, and therefore create even better stuff. So every time I work with Warren, it's been a very successful experience.
Awesome. I just wanted somebody else to sing his praises for once, because I do that all the time here on the channel. And I feel like people are like, you're just a fanboy. I'm like, you don't get it.
That said, both me and Warren are loquacious gentlemen. So putting us in the room together can be problematic from time to time. I hope you really enjoy listening, because we can both talk.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, some of the conversations that we've had on camera, off camera, I have always been able to take something from that conversation. So super, super awesome individual. Love Warren to death. With that being said, I'm not going to take up too much more of your time. I just have two more questions.
All right.
Okay. These are going to be curveball questions.
Oh, good. Finally, somebody's going to throw me a tough question.
All right. What is your favorite color?
That's a curveball question?
This is a curveball question.
Probably blue.
What does the color blue taste like?
I mean, it's usually somehow raspberries, at least according to the packaging on these fruit snacks.
I love it. I love it. I have yet to find a creative person who hasn't come up with an answer like this. I mean, now I have, and I always tell this story. I've never told people who the individual was, because I don't want to hurt his feelings, but he's a very, very analytical thinker. And when I asked him this question, it just threw him for a loop. Like, he just shut down. He's like, what's your favorite color? And black. What does black smell like? What? It don't have a smell. I'm like, surely you can come up with something. Well, and it threw him for a loop for probably like a good 3 minutes. And then finally he came up with an answer, and then he almost chuckled at himself that he couldn't come up with one faster. He was like, why did I said, it's okay. You're just an analytical person. It's a mastering engineer. So
I feel like that's an easy one too. Like, because immediately I think of things that have been charred on a barbecue.
There you go.
Like, that smells like barbecue, man. That's not. I don't even feel like that's a creative answer. I feel like it's
right.
just low-hanging fruit.
Right.
It'd be another thing if somebody was like, "Oh, it smells like papaya." Then you just be sitting there thinking about it.
Wait a minute. Now you threw me for a loop. Hold on.
Like, what?
Well, Matt, I greatly appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I want to extend a hand as well to you. If there's anything that I can do personally for you, when your website comes out, when your new course comes out, whatever it might be, to help try to promote that, let me know. As has already been stated in the description of this video, you can find his course that is on the 𝗨𝗵𝐴 Academy. You can also find his website to go and hire him if you'd like to work alongside of him. I'm absolutely positively sure that you are going to, if you do decide to work with him, that you're going to be blown away by the results. I've listened to a lot of his music. He has some chops, definitely has some chops. So is there anything you would like to say to our studio audience today before parting?
No, I just want to say thanks for having me, Rob. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, until next time, I'm going to go ahead and let him go, but I want to let you guys know, stick around. The monthly song contest is getting ready to come to a close, and we'll be doing a listen together as we always do. And also be sure to be involved in September's monthly song contest. Likewise, we're going to have a 10,000 subscriber bash, I guess you could call it, much like we did for our 5,000 subscriber. At that 10,000 subscriber, I'm getting some people lined up already. Melodyne, actually, I just got off the horn, so to speak, with Melodyne. They're going to be giving away a copy of Melodyne 5 Studio for those 10,000 subs. So very, very, very kind of them. And hopefully some other plugins. I got some guitar pedals that we're going to be giving away. So stay tuned. Make sure you tell all your friends, and go and check out Matthew's channel as well. There's a lot of great stuff on there. And I love the fact too that it's not so serious. He can be serious. Don't get me wrong. When it gets too serious, it just starts blowing your mind, like he did here several times. but I love the fact too that he can also kind of let his hair down, so to speak, and
I think I did that. Yeah. I let my hair all the way down.
Nice. Matt, thank you so much for being on the channel. Love and appreciate your spirit. Love what you're doing, man. Keep it up. And thank you everybody for stopping by today. All right. Stream is officially ended.